Investigators were back at the Nancy Guthrie home today with the most visible activity we've seen in days.
Breaking tonight, what unfolded inside a silent interrogation room at the Federal Bureau of Investigation may become one of the most unsettling family betrayals investigators have faced in years. Because when agents began questioning Nancy Guthrie's own son-in-law, the conversation didn't just create more questions. According to people familiar with the investigation, it may have blown the entire story wide open. For weeks, the public had been left staring at a mystery that made no sense. An 84-year-old grandmother disappears in the middle of the night. No broken doors, no shattered windows, no evidence of struggle, just an empty home and a haunting silence where she once was. But what federal investigators reportedly uncovered during a grueling 6-hour FBI interrogation shifted the entire trajectory of the case. At the beginning of the questioning, the son-in-law appeared composed, almost too composed. Calm voice, controlled posture, the kind of quiet confidence that suggested he believed he had nothing to fear.
Today, there's kind of a potential breakthrough that authorities could use for their investigation.
Almost casual, the kind of quiet swagger you only see in someone convinced they've already outplayed everyone else in the room. For nearly 90 minutes, he repeated the same carefully rehearsed story over and over, insisting he loved Nancy like his own family and had absolutely no idea where she had gone. But then something happened. Something insiders say instantly changed the temperature inside that interrogation room. One of the agents leaned forward, reached across the metal table, and tapped a single button on a recorder. A voice filled the room. His voice. And in that exact second, the entire narrative he had been building began to unravel. Because what investigators say was captured on that recording suggested something far darker than anyone had imagined. And once the audio ended, what followed would permanently alter how this case is viewed. When the recording stopped, the room fell into complete silence. Not the ordinary kind of quiet. This was the kind that feels thick in the air, the kind that makes every person in the room realize that the moment they're sitting in has just shifted the entire investigation. Across the cold metal table sat Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, the same man who had spent the past 90 minutes calmly insisting he had nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with her disappearance. Just minutes earlier, he had looked comfortable, almost confident. But now, something had changed. His shoulders tightened, his posture shifted ever so slightly, and the hands that had remained steady for the entire interrogation suddenly began to tremble against the table. The FBI agents noticed it immediately. Because interrogations rarely collapse all at once, they fracture slowly. And the first fracture had just appeared. Special Agent Russell Dante leaned forward, studying the man across from him, the way someone studies a puzzle that has finally started to reveal its hidden pattern. "That's your voice on the recording, isn't it?" The answer came fast. Too fast. "That's not me." But even as the words left his mouth, something about the tone didn't match the confidence he'd shown earlier. The certainty had vanished. What replaced it sounded strained, defensive, a voice forcing itself to sound sure. Dante didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he calmly reached out and pressed play again. Once more, the recording echoed through the room. A hushed conversation, time-stamped at 2:47 in the morning. A disposable burner phone dialing the son-in-law's personal number. Two men speaking in low voices. One of them clearly panicking about a situation spinning dangerously out of control. The other voice, calm, steady, responding with instructions. Precise instructions. Instructions about what to do with Nancy. The kind of instructions only someone deeply involved would even know how to give. When the recording stopped for the second time, the suspect didn't look at the agents. He didn't look at the laptop. He stared straight down at the table, as if the answer might somehow be hidden in the scratches of the metal surface. The silence stretched. Then he tried another angle. That call wasn't about Nancy. Agent Dante raised an eyebrow slightly. "Oh, it was about a business issue with my cousin Marcus." A brief pause followed. For a moment, the explanation almost sounded believable. Almost, except for one problem. The agents already knew exactly who Marcus was, and they also knew Marcus had been talking for nearly 4 hours. Still, Dante let the explanation hang there in the air. Let the suspect believe, for just a moment, that maybe the story might actually work. Then the second agent quietly slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were printed pages, dozens of them. Text messages. Every single message exchanged between the son-in-law and Marcus during the 3 weeks leading up to Nancy's disappearance. Dante opened the folder slowly and began reading the first message aloud. "Thursday night works best. Her routine never changes." Another sheet slid across the table. "You'll need to disable the doorbell camera first. I'll show you exactly where it is. Another page. She takes sleeping pills around 10. Wait an hour. With every line Dante read, the air inside the room seemed to grow colder. These weren't vague messages tossed around as speculation. They were precise directions, calculated steps, the kind of language you'd expect to see in a carefully organized operation. Not casual conversation, not dark humor. How long can an elderly person live without heart medication? What happens if blood pressure medication is suddenly stopped? Then came something even more chilling, the names of the exact prescriptions Nancy Guthrie took every single day. The same medications she didn't have with her when she disappeared. The implication drifted through the room like smoke, because suddenly this didn't sound like the planning of a ransom scheme anymore. It sounded like preparation. Preparation for something far worse. Dante kept reading. How to disable residential security cameras. How to bypass home alarm systems. Best remote desert locations for hiding evidence. Each line struck the room like a hammer blow, and the confidence the suspect had walked in with earlier was gone. Completely gone. Finally, he spoke again. But this time, the explanation sounded thin. Fragile. I was researching for a book. A book. The room stayed silent for a moment. Then Dante calmly closed a report and looked up. A book. Yes. What's the title? The suspect blinked. I haven't decided yet. Dante leaned back slightly in his chair, because according to the forensic report, there were no draft files. No notes. No outlines. Not a single document anywhere on the device, suggesting he had ever written even one page of a novel. Just weeks of digging into kidnapping methods, ransom tactics, and the fragile medical condition of an 84-year-old woman. And investigators were far from finished, because the deeper they dug into his digital footprint, the darker the timeline became. One search in particular froze the room. It had been typed exactly 72 hours before Nancy vanished. Agent Dante read the line slowly, carefully, letting every word settle. Do accomplices receive lighter sentences if the victim dies during captivity? The sentence seemed to hang in the air long after he finished reading it. For the first time in nearly 4 hours, the second FBI agent stopped writing in his notebook and simply stared across the table, because that single question suggested something deeply unsettling. Maybe this had never been about kidnapping alone. Maybe it had always been about making sure Nancy never returned home. And if that possibility was real, the motive behind this entire nightmare was about to look even more disturbing, because investigators had also been following the money. And the financial trail they uncovered told the story of a man whose life was collapsing far faster than anyone outside that interrogation room realized. The moment investigators began tracing the finances, the motive suddenly became impossible to ignore. Inside the room, the agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation quietly placed another document in front of him. This one had nothing to do with phone calls, nothing to do with text messages, nothing to do with internet searches. This was a financial report, a complete breakdown of the son-in-law's personal finances during the months leading up to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. And the numbers told a story almost as shocking as the evidence already on the table. The man sitting across from the agents wasn't simply under financial pressure. He was drowning in it. His checking account had been overdrawn for weeks. Credit cards completely maxed out. Mortgage payments months behind. According to investigators, foreclosure paperwork had already begun moving through the system. Total debt had climbed beyond $250,000. But that wasn't the detail that made the agents lean closer. The real surprise appeared in the withdrawal records. Over the previous 3 weeks, the son-in-law had withdrawn $30,000 in cash. Not small amounts, large withdrawals repeated again and again. When Agent Dante asked where the money had gone, the answers started shifting almost immediately. First, he claimed it was business expenses. Then the explanation changed to home repairs. And then came something investigators recognized instantly during interrogations. Silence, because there was no explanation left to give. $30,000 had vanished, and the agents already knew exactly where it went. Straight into the hands of his cousin, the same cousin whose voice appeared on that late-night phone call, Marcus. And according to investigators, Marcus had already told them everything. But the most disturbing discovery wasn't about the money. It was about something far more valuable, Nancy's will. You see, Nancy Guthrie wasn't only a beloved grandmother. She was also the owner of a multi-million-dollar estate. Her existing will divided that estate evenly between her 2 daughters. One of those daughters happened to be married to the man now sitting in that interrogation chair, which meant if Nancy passed away under the current will, her daughter would inherit roughly $2 million. Money that would legally become marital property. Money that would instantly wipe out every debt crushing the son-in-law's life. Every overdue payment. Every collection notice. Every financial disaster gone overnight. But investigators uncovered one final detail that changed everything. Nancy had recently scheduled an appointment with her attorney. The meeting was only days away. Its purpose? Updating her will. And according to sources familiar with the situation, those changes would have dramatically reduced the inheritance going to her daughter, which meant the $2 million lifeline the son-in-law had been counting on was about to disappear forever. Investigators believe he knew about the appointment. He had overheard Nancy discussing the changes during a family dinner just days earlier. The same dinner where she laughed while sharing stories about her late husband. The same evening where she trusted him enough to drive her home afterward. And according to the timeline investigators have reconstructed, that may have been the exact moment everything shifted. Because a man watching his financial world collapse while his last escape route vanishes can make decisions that destroy lives, including his own. By the 6th hour of interrogation, the agents began realizing something even more chilling. Throughout the entire questioning, the man suspected of orchestrating this nightmare had cried. He had trembled. He had panicked about his future. But there was one thing he had never done. Not once. He never asked if Nancy was still alive. And according to investigators, what his cousin Marcus eventually revealed about the first 48 hours after Nancy was taken was even more disturbing than anyone inside that room expected. What makes this entire case even more unsettling is that the interrogation may have exposed only part of the truth. Because Nancy Guthrie's disappearance continues to raise questions investigators are still struggling to answer. Think about it. An 84-year-old grandmother vanishes. A son-in-law buried under crushing debt. Secret calls in the middle of the night. Weeks of disturbing online searches. And an inheritance worth millions that was about to vanish. Was this really a desperate kidnapping plan that spiraled out of control? Or was something much darker planned from the beginning? According to sources connected to the investigation, FBI detectives are still analyzing evidence that could expose even more shocking details in the days ahead. Financial records, phone data, and statements from the accomplice who may know exactly what happened during the critical hours after Nancy disappeared. But one question continues to haunt this entire case. If the plan was simply ransom, why were there searches about survival without medication? Why were there questions about what happens when a captive victim doesn't survive? And why, during 6 hours of questioning, did the man sitting in that interrogation chair never once ask the most important question of all? Is Nancy okay? That single detail has left investigators deeply unsettled. Because sometimes the silence inside an interrogation room speaks louder than any confession ever could. So what do you think really happened here? Was this a kidnapping scheme that spiraled into tragedy, or a calculated plan investigators uncovered just in time? Share your thoughts below, because this story is far from over. And if you want to stay updated on the latest developments surrounding the Nancy Guthrie case, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next piece of evidence investigators reveal could change everything.